For more, I'm joined now by Kayla Tausche. She's CNBC's senior White House correspondent. Stephanie Ruhle is the senior business analyst for us here at NBC News. And Betsy Stevenson, who was a member of the Obama administration's Council of Economic Advisors and served as the Labor Department's chief economist. She's now a professor of economics of the University of Michigan. So, Kayla, let me start with you and simply, look, you're reporting what you're hearing. It seems as if the Biden administration is more worried about the perception of the economy than anything else. Are they arguing it's a strong economy, or are they admitting that this is a weird and potentially weakening economy?
Well, Chuck, they're sort of caught between a rock and a hard place, because on one hand, they've been arguing that the price of gasoline and the price of oil has been going down for the last 6 weeks. But if you talk to people in the market, they say that the reason why the price of oil and gas are going down is because there are fears of a recession. There are fears that people will spend less money to travel, and that demand to actually put gas in your car or use some of that refined fuel will go down. But that's not what the White House wants to acknowledge here. And they're trying to thread this needle about whether a recession may technically exist. Even before they get the data, Jason Furman, who chaired the CEA under President Obama, said that the administration should get it sometime this evening before it's released tomorrow. But they're trying to make this very nuanced argument. But, Chuck, you know as well as anyone, it doesn't really matter if people on the ground feel that things really aren't going well. And even today, the chair of the Federal Reserve said people are eating less. They're seeing consumption of food going down because people's paychecks aren't covering the amount of groceries they're simply used to buying. So it really doesn't matter whether it's a recession with a capital R or a lowercase r, or things just really feel bad out there.
You know, Stephanie, you and I have talked about this before when it comes to the coverage. An economy isn't made up of data points. Economy is actually driven by perception, whether we want to admit it or not, correct?
That's absolutely the case, Chuck. But getting in this academic conversation about the definition of a recession, sure, that's important. But what's really important for this White House is to talk about what they're actually doing, because they are doing things. They're addressing prescription drug prices. They're addressing broader, wider access to broadband, cheapening it for people. There's a focus they can make on that right now, because what we really have, Chuck, is a complicated economy. In a country with over 300 million people, where over the course of COVID, the rich got rich and the poor got poorer, we're living in two different Americas, right? We know that household savings is up. Right. And if demand goes down for travel, for goods, that's one of the reasons they're raising rates, to reduce demand, to slow things down. So at the very least, rather than looking at this economy as it's a good economy, it's a bad economy, and trying to simplify it, embrace that we are coming out of COVID and we're dealing with the war in Ukraine, and it's a very complicated one.
Betsy, why is it so hard to just admit it's a rocky economy, that this is a weird, strange, rocky? For the life of me, I find this rhetorical dance they're doing at the White House wasted energy.
Well, I think that the White House is doing what Stephanie just said they should be doing, which is they're trying to talk about the things that they are doing to try to support the economy and to try to support families. It isn't about data points. This is about people's lives. And the thing is, people have jobs, and jobs are really, really important to people. So you think we're feeling the pinch now because prices are high. We'll be feeling the pinch a lot more if we see unemployment rise. No one wants to see that. And, you know, I think that the administration's doing everything they can to prevent that and to point out to people, look, things are still good on the employment front. But here's the problem. To bring inflation down, we got to bring demand down. People do have to buy less food because the global rise in the price of food is partially due to a contraction in the supply. There's less to go around. Right. The Fed is trying to get people to buy less of everything by raising rates because demand has outstripped supply, and we got rising prices. So, you know, the problem in this world right now is the only way to get inflation down is somebody has to feel the pinch, and nobody wants to feel the pinch.
No, it's been, come on, we've had the free money cycle where everybody can start buying things like in the air, like Bitcoin and things like that. Betsy, let me work my way backwards here. The fact that the Fed chair seemed to hint that if the next round of rates will be smaller, is that because data like housing going, the home sales going down as fast as they have? Is this a sign that it's working?
Oh, I think, first of all, the Fed was doing everything they could to not give any forward guidance on what they're doing. The next time they make a move, they're going to have 2 more months of employment data. They're going to have more GDP data. We don't actually know whether GDP is contracted, and this is where you get into the wonky stuff. One measure of GDP, which is called GDI, says GDP went up. Another measure of GDP, the one we normally report, says it went down. The Fed's got to take in all this data to figure out what to do. But what they wanted was a path where they moved quickly now to normalize rates, get them up, and then they sort of slowly increase them a little bit to get them to their target range. But if the economy contracts more than they expect, if the rate rises they've already done work better than they expect, then they might have to do less. If they work less well than they expect, they might have to do more. And they left that window open for them to make those choices.
Stephanie, I think the fairest argument the administration makes about whether this is a recession or not is whether the unemployment rate is going up. What is the sector or two you're watching, Stephanie, that would be the canary in the coal mine to say, uh-oh, now this is going to become a jobs recession too?
Well, if you look at some of the lower wage sectors, if you look at retail, if you look at leisure and hospitality, we know coming out of COVID, people saved up their money and there was huge demand to go out again, to spend again. And those businesses struggled to find workers. If they are starting to cut workers, that's not going to be a good sign. But one thing I would say about housing, this goes back to your point of it's all about how people feel. Right? Months ago, people were arguing, oh, my God, the housing market is so hot. I can't possibly buy a house. I'm priced out of the market. This is a disaster. Well, now the housing market is starting to cool off. And people are saying, oh, my gosh, now the economy is in disaster. I thought my house was worth $700,000 and now it's worth $500,000. So it's sort of like, which way do you want it?
Well, I will tell you, we still have a housing shortage in America. So the idea that this is going to be a big dip, be careful if you've been putting off buying a house. Kayla, let me talk about other things that you didn't bring up that the administration could do, but they seem to be, I guess, punting the idea. The big one is those Trump tariffs. Is that no longer in the cards?
Well, it's something that's still on the table, Chuck, but there's been this policy paralysis behind the scenes where you have different factions who are of various levels of hawkishness who want the president to do different things. Does that sound familiar from the last administration? Well, the Biden administration is going through the same thing. You have hawks on the National Security Council who want him to take a harder line. If he's going to be rolling back some tariffs, they want him to increase other tariffs. And then there are others like the Treasury Secretary who say you'll have the most economic bang for your buck if you just do a wholesale rollback. Then you have others who say if China's not going to be giving you anything in return, then this is unilaterally, politically a really bad move. And the president hasn't been able to make up his mind here. John Kirby, who's the communications head for the National Security Council, said that tariffs are not going to be a main topic on this call with President Xi tomorrow. We will see whether that remains the case and whether the president actually decides. But I think, Chuck, anyone who expects that's going to be a silver bullet are wrong, because the estimates show that even if they did do a wholesale rollback of those, it's only going to be about a fraction of a percent in terms of the impact on inflation.
I hear you. A fraction here, a fraction there. You might actually come up with a percent. Very quickly, Kayla, immigration. That's just any sort of increase in work in visas to get workers into this country. Politically, that's just dead in the water, too, isn't it?
It is, yeah. I mean, broad-based immigration reform has not been something that this Congress or this administration have been able to push forward. But, Chuck, it's also worth noting that's a long-term solution. And what the White House wants and needs right now is something that will help inflation between now and November. And that solution just simply doesn't exist.
Betsy, what would you be advising? You know, a fraction here and a fraction there. I mean, you know, there was some ideas. They were going to try to, like, go at this a million different ways. A gas tax holiday, the Trump, the tariffs, some of the non-national security driven tariffs on China, maybe increasing immigration workflow, but none of them are being tried.
I actually do think that they're trying things. They're small, and we don't hear about all of them. But I do think that they're trying to do some of their stuff, the stuff that they they can. I would push them to do more in terms of removing tariffs, like just remove tariffs. If we can remove the gas tax for, certainly we should be able to remove some tariffs. The gas tax was all about letting people know we're going to do everything we can to try to bring the price of gas down. They're also going to have to be dealing, with the EU's views on being able to buy Russian oil, making sure that the price of global oil doesn't go high. I think that's going to be a #1 priority for them between now and November, because, if we get another surge in global oil prices and a surge in gas prices, I think that's sort of the whole ball game. But we got to be taking advantage of those half fraction here and there. And with that, I would be pushing to bring in temporary immigrants if you can, bring more people into the country. We are still missing, particularly female immigrants who work in the care sector are still really missing in the United States compared to where they'd be prior to the pandemic. So I'd be finding a way to get them in the country temporarily now. And I'd be finding a way to cut those tariffs.
But Chuck,
Stephanie, finally, go ahead. Yeah.
I would just say the one thing that we keep putting on the White House is, what are you going to do to help the economy? We have such a big and complicated economy. Betsy was just talking about the gas tax holiday. Sure, that's hugely important for people who live places where they're driving every day, maybe where they drive SUVs and gas-guzzling trucks. But for the poorest Americans who don't even drive, who are taking the bus to work, it doesn't matter at all. So I think that we keep misdiagnosing things. If they did this one thing, it would really help the economy. We have such a big, complicated one. There isn't one thing.
I want to end with this, though, and Betsy, I'm going to go back to you on this. Is somebody going to do an after-action report and explain how the Fed missed inflation? Because we wouldn't be in this situation had they started to dial this sooner. Is that worth our time, and will we see something like this? I mean, there's a big miss by the federal government and, an attack on the United States. We investigate and figure out what went wrong. Are they doing that at the Fed?
Oh, well, I will certainly tell you, I've been to a lot of conferences where the Feds looked at what they did wrong leading into the global financial crisis. So I have no doubt that they'll be looking back at this. But, it's not clear to me that they necessarily did anything wrong. We live in an uncertain world where you make decisions on the basis of probabilities and that, the potential to make mistakes. If we hadn't recovered demand so quickly, then the Fed easy money would have been necessary to really help us get back to full employment, get back to full GDP faster. I think everything the Fed did, I think everything that Congress and the White House did through both administrations to get money in people's pockets are why we had a V-shaped recovery. That's a miracle. Should the Fed have pulled back earlier? It's obvious to say that in hindsight. Could we ever have said that in foresight? I don't know. But the researchers will certainly be taking a look.
Chuck, I'm going to send you 2,000 words that I wrote for CNBC.com. I'll send you a big piece, an investigation I did for CNBC.com on that very question. And the spoiler is what they got wrong were outdated models, too many people from the Fed who are currently working at Treasury and the White House who all bought into the transitory story, and then a 5-month delay before President Biden renominated Chair Powell to a second term.
Kayla Tausche of CNBC, Stephanie Ruhle, my colleague at NBC News, and Betsy Stevenson, longtime economist and veteran of the federal government. Thank you all.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Follow today's top stories and breaking news by downloading the NBC News app.